Hey, how's it going? Welcome to another setup video. And in this video, I'm going to be setting up a Victron system that has been pre-assembled in a workshop, which I think is a really good way to do it because the internet might not be too good on site. So the good idea is to pre-assemble the system in the workshop, um, get it online using preferably an Ethernet cable. Then you don't have to worry about Wi-Fi, but Wi-Fi's fine. Um, and then you can, at your leisure, set the system up, do firmware updates, etc., etc. So we're going to run through a Victron system, and I'm going to do a bit of a dummy at the moment. I'll just I'll share the screen with you, and then we can look at how to set that up. So if this is my home system, what you're going to do is when you're in your VRM portal, make sure you obviously sign up for VRM. That's a good thing. Go back and then go back and then go add installation. So you see here, it says add installation. You're going to click on that. And then what you're going to do is you're going to select which device you've actually got. In this case, we've got a Serbo GX. And then you put your VRM portal ID in, and you'll put a site name. And I would recommend going something like that, company and site name, so that then if you're going to ask someone like myself to lend some support at some stage, then I can search under your company because I've got quite a few sites that are under my name. So then the next thing you need to do is to click connect. And then you'll see there, the portal ID could not be found. Okay, so that either means one of two things. It's not connected to the internet, or you've mistyped the portal ID. Now, in this case, as you could see, I just put a random portal ID in there. So I'm actually going to go to the one that I prepared earlier. And this is what it looks like when it actually works. It comes up. So what you're going to do now is you want to go to the screen on the actual system. If it's a Serbo GX, for instance, or an Acrano, you want to go to the screen and you want to check on, go to settings, and then check on remote console. Did I miss that? I think I just missed that. Remote console, there it is. And you want to make sure to enable it on VRM and then click disable password. And then you want to make sure that you reboot it. So you click disable password, you enable on VRM, click disable password, then you're going to go up to the screen. Now this is all going to happen and you're going to click reboot. Okay, so I'm not going to do that now. But that's all going to happen before if you have trouble getting onto remote console. Now, if this, see this little remote console button there, if that's not on your VRM as in part of this menu, if that's just not there, then you know that that's what you need to do locally on the site, okay? But it is there. So we're in with a grin, and we can see there that we've got nothing coming in on the PV charger. The inverter is off. So we can turn the inverter on. And when that inverter comes on, then it will obviously be available to program. At the moment, the smart solar charge controller is there. It's the MPPT 25070. This is in the device list. And then you've got notifications and settings. So what I'm going to do is quickly run through the settings, and then we will look at programming the inverter. And we'll also then look at programming the charge controller. So we'll run through these settings, and let's start from the top. It's pretty easy. General. So I want to leave the access level at user and installer, unless you really don't trust the user and you want to put a password in. Generally, just leave it at user and installer. Remote support. You will enable remote support, and that allows a lot more features to be accessed remotely, such as firmware updates and et cetera, et cetera. Don't enable the demo mode. If you enable the demo mode, it can actually damage the battery or overcharge the battery. The battery should have a BMS in it, which will protect itself, but it may well turn the battery off because it disables the CAN bus comms. So let's go to firmware. I'm going to leave this now, and I can see that it's version 2.91, and I know that there's a later version. See there, we have available version 3.31, but I'm not going to update that yet because I don't want to reboot during this session. So what I'm going to do is carry on, and then I'll do the firmware update last. So we go to date and time. You want to set your date and time wherever you are. There's different areas there. We are in the Pacific in New Zealand, Auckland or Wellington. The time is the same for the whole country. And then remote console. So this is what we're in now, right? So I don't really need to do anything, except I could enable it on LAN, which is the local area network, which basically then means that you can get access to the remote console on LAN. I don't know whether you want that or not. That's up to you. Just a bit of extra security if you don't have it on LAN, because then if someone's sharing your Wi-Fi and sees, oh, look at this Victron thing, and then starts getting into this, they could wreak a bit of havoc. So now, depending on what sort of inverter you've got, if you've got a Quattro, you've got 2 AC inputs. If you've got a Multiplus, then you've only got one. So in this case, it's a Multiplus, and we're going to go AC input 2 is not available. And then we're going to go AC input 1 because this is an off-grid system. I'm going to say AC input 1 is a generator. And then further down, we've got battery monitor, and we can look at that a bit later on as well. Battery measurements, and has DC system. Basically, you don't really want to enable this unless you've got a bit of a unusual setup on your battery where you might have another charger that's not Victron or an inverter that's not Victron running on that battery. And if you enable that, then it will calculate what that charger or inverter is actually drawing or charging. DVCC, that's distributed voltage and current control. Normally that will be disabled for a normal initial setup, but as soon as you enable the battery will automatically force that DVCC setting on, and all its settings will be available. You can adjust a few of them, but you really don't need to. It will automatically set DVCC up for you. Display and language. Of course, you want to set it to your language. And if you're watching this video and you're not speaking English, then well done getting this far. 10 minutes. How long do you want the display to stay on for after you've been using it before it turns off? Now, depending on where you set the system up, you may actually want it to not ever turn off. And so you can glance at it whenever you walk past, or you may want it to turn off. If you're in something like a shed where you've got insects floating around, you don't want them to be attracted to the light, then turn that off. VRM online portal, this is what we're doing, right? We're accessing it through the VRM. That was the remote console setting, but this is actually what settings for the VRM data are we going to have. Log interval, I've set that at 1 minute. You may decide to set it at 15 minutes, but 1 minute's fine. It just means you've got a lot more data to work with when you're trying to find a fault. If there is a fault, or you're just looking over the data of the system, you can see spikes a bit better. And yeah. Now, enable two-way communication, definitely. And I often do reboot the device when there's no contact, because sometimes you are going to get internet routers that that are really cheap. A lot of internet companies sell cheap internet routers, and some of those Ethernet port, the chips that are on the Ethernet port inside that router might reject something that's not like a standard PC. And so occasionally it'll just drop the Victron system, and that's painful because you want internet access to the system. You want the system to be logging. You don't want the router to just boot it off because something else is going on, like 3 people are streaming Netflix or something. So I set that at reboot for 1 hour. If it's got no communication with the VRM online portal, then it will reboot this GX device. It won't kill the power to the system or anything like that. It'll just reboot the GX device, and that reboot will then make the internet router see that see the GX device online and then connect to it again. So that's sometimes good if you've got issues with it dropping offline. I just enable it out of habit. ESS, that's for on-grid battery systems. We won't cover that in this because this is an off-grid system. Energy meters, again, we're not going to cover that, but energy meters will show up under that menu, and you can assign an energy meter to be a grid meter or a charger meter, you know, like a PV inverter meter, or just a general meter for metering a load, something like that, that you want to actually incorporate and capture the data of a load. Has to be a Victron energy meter. PV inverters, there are certain types of PV inverters that will actually talk to a Victron system. The Fronius Gen 24, for example, or the Fronius Simo, or the Fronius older Fronius Snap inverters, they will all talk to the Victron system. The Fronius Toro will also talk to a Victron system. Now, they talk to a Victron system through the local area network. So what you're going to do is you're going to press scan if you've got one of these inverters installed on the system as an AC coupled solar array. And then when you scan that, it will bring up the inverter serial number here, and you can assign that to either be on the AC input or the AC output. Wireless AC sensors, we're not going to really cover that. Modbus TCP devices, very seldom are you going to use those. Ethernet, so you can see if you've plugged into Ethernet, you can see if it's connected or not, what your IP addresses are, etc. And then you've also got Wi-Fi. So are you connected to Wi-Fi? And then you want to scan your Wi-Fi access points, and then you want to go down and you can connect to any one of those Wi-Fi access points. You basically want there to be a signal strength of above 50% is pretty healthy to get decent Wi-Fi and to be able to rely on it, especially if you want to access the remote console or do remote programming, etc. Bluetooth, there are certain Bluetooth temperature sensors that are available online. Ruvi is a good one. You can connect to those if you want to. GPS, we're not going to use that because it's a stationary system. If you're in an RV or a boat, then you may want to attach a GPS dongle onto the system. Generator start stop, very important, but we can't actually access that. If you go like this, it's not, function is not enabled. Go to relay settings, set the function, then come back to this. Tank pump, we're not going to do that. Relay, there it is. So relay 1 at the moment is set to an alarm relay. So we want to set that to generator start stop. There we go. Relay 2, we don't need to bother about that, but we go back to generator start stop, and lo and behold, we have a whole lot of functionality. So we can now go, I want this to be an automatic start stop. generator, and you basically need to order a generator that is 2-wire auto start. So 2-wire auto start. It needs a 2-wire auto start input on the generator for this functionality to operate properly. And then you run from normally open and common of the relay on the GX device straight to the 2-wire auto start on the generator. And then you set it up like this. Settings. We're not going to go through quiet hours or anything like that because there's a whole lot of functionality on the generator auto start that that you can use for different situations. But generally, if you've got a good battery that keeps track of its own state of charge, you're going to enable the generator to start on state of charge, and you want to use most of the battery. So depending on how low you want that battery to go, you can set it to whatever state of charge you want it to be. Remember to set quiet hours and normal hours, which basically means you can set up a period overnight where the generator will let the battery go a lot lower, so to 20%. But during the day, if the battery is below, say, 40%, you know that it's not going to last all night. So then let's start the generator during the day at a higher state of charge and get more energy into the battery to last you overnight. So that this kind of helps you to, to not get so much disturbance during the night with a generator starting up, especially if the generator is close to the house or is going to annoy neighbors, with the noise. You can set the stop value at whatever you feel is appropriate based on how big the battery is and how long it needs to, what state of charge it needs to be at to last you till the next solar day, when the sun comes up and starts charging from solar. And you can enable quiet hours there if you want to and set that up yourself. Relay, we've already looked into that. Services. This is where you're going to set up the BMS to look at the battery. So the battery is, this particular battery is not plugged into the BMS, but we can plug that in. So if we look at what happens there, we go back to the device list and we will plug the battery in on the BMS CAN bus to the GX device. So there you can see the Freedom Light battery has popped up in the device list. Right, so we will go back now to the programming setup, and like I said, we've gotten all the way down to the bottom, services. We're not going to use the inputs and outputs, so we don't need to worry about that. What we'll do now is a last thing on the Servo GX programming is we will update the firmware. When you click on it, you can see there, it'll say downloading, but if it's already downloaded, then it will say installing like it is now. So it's now installing. What you'll notice is if you do that first off, you'll get halfway through this programming and it will reboot it. And that's a little bit painful. So while we're waiting for that to install, let's look at the software that you need, which maybe we should have started with, but this is where you're going to now need the software. So if we look at software, you go to Victron Energy support and downloads /software, or just type in Victron space software into your search engine, and that will just bring up a link to this page, a very common page. So we've got Victron Connect here. It'll normally look like this. And you want to download that for whatever version of Windows or phone or whatever you're on, okay? That's Victron Connect. But don't forget, scroll down and you've got another piece of software here, VE configuration tools for VE bus products. That's configuration tools there. You click on that, that will download, and that's going to install VE config 3. It's going to install VE bus quick configure, VE bus system configurator, VE flash, which you're pretty much never going to use nowadays. You may need to, but it's unlikely. But it's going to download those 4 pieces of software for you. Just install it onto your laptop, and away you go. Now, in this video, I'm not going to talk about the Mark II or Mark III USB requirements, because for a single inverter system, you don't need the Mark III USB. But if you're installing a stacked inverter where you've got 2 inverters on one phase or 3 inverters on one phase, you're definitely going to need your Mark III USB driver. It's a physical tool. Okay, it's a Mark III, not driver, the actual tool. It's a USB tool that you plug into your laptop to configure multiple inverters on one site. So if you're doing that, that will be under a different training video. It's also on site at on the Victron training. So if you want to do some Victron training, you can find a lot of their videos just on YouTube if you want to. So you're going to download and install that software, and then you're going to go back to the VRM online portal, and you're going to click on device list, and then you're going to look at the device. So you'll see there under the device list, you can see the various devices. We've got a Servo GX, we've got a VE bus system, which is the inverter. It's a Multiplus 2, 485000, great. We've got a battery monitor, which is the Freedom 1 battery, and we've got a solar charger. So as far as programming goes, we've already programmed the Servo GX using the remote console. And now we need to program the Multiplus 2. Before we program the Multiplus 2, I'm actually going to do a firmware update on that. So under device list again, so you're going to click on the device list, and then you're going to click firmware update. And it's going to scan all the devices that are attached to the gateway, and all those devices, including the gateway, are going to come up in a list and tell you what firmware is in each device. Takes a bit of time. That's why it's really good to have a good internet connection. Now, notice the Servo GX is up to date. That's because we just updated it through the remote console. Now, when you update the firmware in the Servo GX through the remote console, it does not update the smart charger, the charge controller, or the inverters or inverter. So those devices are still out of date. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to update the charge controller, which is a nice, easy update. You just click it and away it goes. Just going to download the firmware update to the Servo GX, and it's going to write the firmware to the device, and then ping, we're all done. So we'll let it go ahead and do that. And you can see there the progress percentage-wise. If for some reason you get disconnected from the internet, or the power gets killed to the MPPT while you're updating that firmware, no need to worry, it will hang, and then you can come back to it and try again. So there's probably no point in us waiting, so we'll skip ahead to where it's updated. So there we can see it's been updated. Yes, thumbs up. We can see there now. We're up to date. Now, The inverter updating is quite a bit difficult. Sorry, not a bit difficult. It's a bit different from the other updates in that the inverter is the device that runs the power to the site. And so if you need to update an inverter firmware, it's actually going to reboot that inverter, which means it's going to kill the power to the site. And that means your internet router is going to die. So you're going to be blind from the site. You're not going to be able to see the site until that power comes back on, which it will. The inverter will boot back up again. The internet router will come back online again. And then the GX device, the Servo GX or whatever it is, needs to connect to the internet again and then give you access again. So that can take up to 5 minutes or so. So in that situation, it basically means that there is a risk that if something goes wrong, the inverter may not reboot. So you may need to actually visit the site. That's why it's pretty important. And when you're dealing with the inverter programming or in the inverter firmware, not to just willy-nilly push an update or push a firmware update into the inverter without informing the customer that they're going to get a power cycle. The other thing is that once you have pushed that update into the inverter, it's going to download the old software from the inverter for you, and it's going to ask you to migrate the settings, which basically means it will change the software settings that it's downloaded into an updated file that suits the latest firmware that you've just updated in the inverter. Then you need to go through those settings and upload that, which we'll do right now, upload that back into the inverter. So the firmware update on an inverter is by far the most risky and comprehensive firmware update that you're going to do on a Victron system. So update device, you'll see here, confirm the understanding of this procedure. You do need to read through this. And just as I explained, the new firmware is uploaded to the GX. Configuration is retrieved from the VE bus system. Basically, whenever you see VE bus system, that means the inverter or inverters. The inverter is switched off. Its firmware is updated. Be aware there will be no AC power available. The internet connection might be lost, unless, of course, the internet connection is a hotspot, or if the internet connection is perhaps backed up by a UPS. After the firmware is updated is completed, settings will be reset to defaults, prevent overcharging. The charge current will be set to 0 amps. So it's really a serious move to update this. So it's going, I understand this. So you can read through that in your own time. I'm not going to read through it for you. If you can't read, I'm suggesting perhaps you shouldn't be doing this sort of work. Make sure to turn off the PV inverters. So that's any AC coupled PV inverters. I understand. Confirm GX device is not powered by the inverter. That means your Servo GX needs to be powered from the battery, not from an AC power supply that converts it to DC for the servo. So make sure that that's the case. I understand, and I would like to continue. V-Bus digital devices. So there are a whole raft of other Victron devices that in this case we don't have. Multi-control, V-Bus BMS. We don't have those. A V-Bus BMS is if you're using Victron batteries. Okay, I understand. Now, the final warning is I understand the risks. It may be necessary to send someone on site to restore the system. If you're going to push a firmware update, you need to be willing to jump in your car, truck, or whatever, or have a technician visit the site or be on site, or the customer understands and is capable of doing a reboot and a restart. You may even need your Mark III USB. Highly unlikely, but you may. But confirm the risks. Okay, I've dramatized that enough, I'm sure. How are you going to update that firmware? Now, on this particular site, we have firmware that is, we have an internet router that is not connected to the power of the inverter. So the internet will actually stay live. So what we will see is it will come back and confirm straight away. And what we'll get is a little download up here, and we'll then go into the inverter programming. Stand by, caller. Let's watch this go through. So it's going to tell you as it goes through kind of where it's up to. And then it's going to download that firmware into your downloads folder. And if you've installed the software, vConfigure 3 software from the Victron website, which is here, this software here from this website, then you will be away and you'll be able to open that directly from your downloads folder. So we're nearly there. We are nearly there. Okay, so that has successfully been updated. The system has been updated and is now switched off. Don't get confused by that. The inverter is actually now powered back on, but with default settings. So we really need to get into that and make sure that we reprogram it. It's awaiting reconfiguration. So we'll click 0x on that, and we'll go to our downloads folder, and we will click on the top one. And here we go. It's opening up. So what we need to do now is check the programming, and this is an opportunity to actually go through the programming of the inverter. But what we'll do is we will just, when you've done the firmware update, it's going to ask you to merge files, a merge of settings after firmware update has been performed. In order to complete, you need to save it. So yes, I want to save it. And I'm just going to save it in my downloads folder. And it will save as the latest time, the latest version. So I'll save that. And we're done with firmware updates. So what we're going to do now is go back to device list in VRM. Now let's look at the VE configure. So once you're in the device list, because we've done the firmware update recently, well, it was the last thing we did, we need to upload that software to the merged file to the system. So this is still part of the firmware update, okay? We're going to select that latest file, and it will just push it up to the system. So again, it's going to tell you the basics of what's going on, what progress it's making. Just note that when this is happening, the screen on the system actually displays some weird stuff. Like the inverter looks like it's off, and all sorts of things are going on that don't make sense. So if the customer's watching, just let them know, look, the screen's not going to really display anything decent. Same with the VRM portal. It won't display normal logical data, mainly because it allocates all the resources to the firmware or the software update, and doesn't want any resources to be used for anything else. So it just basically cuts everything else out. But there we go. It's been configured. So now I'm going to go to the dashboard, going to have a look at that. And we can see there we've got AC loads of 34 watts. That's basically just 7 watts is basically just the inverter, the inverter's load, and we've got nothing happening on PV because we've got no PV attached, no amps and no voltages. And we've got negative 10 watts coming out of the battery. That's just enough to keep the inverter idling along. Okay, so now we're going to go back to the device list, and we're going to go to remote VE configure again. This time we're going to download the VE configuration software from the inverter. Click download, and away we go. We're downloading. And what we're going to do is we're going to program the inverter up to suit. And in this case, it's an off-grid system. It's going to download it into the downloads folder. When we click on that and open it, it will open it in VE Configure 3, which you have already downloaded. So we'll click on that. By this stage, you've already downloaded that. It'll open it up in VE Configure 3. And here we go. This is the inverter programming. So what we need to do is we need to make these changes and then upload the file to the inverter. So it's a bit different from when we were programming the remote console, the GX device, the Servo GX or the Color Control GX or whatever GX you've got. We could use the remote console to program that, and whenever you made a change, it would be live online. This is offline programming. We've downloaded the software, the file, we've opened it in the VE Configure app, and we're going to make the changes, and then we're going to upload it. Okay, so the first thing is we need to go shore limit. You can see that they're designed for the marine environment, which is good. They're a really good solid inverter, but in this case, it's not the shore limit, it's the generator limit. What is the AC input current limit? So we've just, the customer in this case has got a small generator. It's got a 10 amp plug on it. So we're just going to change that to 10 amps. Now, overruled by remote basically means that you can get into the GX device and you can overrule that 10 amp limit if you want to. This is really good for generators that might struggle at 10 amps but be fine at 9 or 8. Or if you want to be able to vary it and try and get the maximum you can, or out of the generator, or treat it nicely, or what, for whatever reason. I normally do tick overruled by remote. I think that's good to tick. It means you don't have to download the file, change it, and upload it again, and then test it. You can test it on the fly through the screen or through the remote console. So there are a lot of things in here that I'm not going to cover. One of them is dynamic current limiter. You can tick or untick that. We'll talk about the battery monitor shortly, but I am going to tick that, and it's going to ask you what size is the battery. And I'm just going to say it's 10 kilowatt hours, so 200 amp hours, approximately at 50 volts. Okay. And because it's lithium, normally when it finishes its bulk, when it gets to absorb, which is the voltage that you're aiming for, we'll talk about that shortly. Normally that's around 95% charged, because lithium has got a pretty flat charge curve. So grid, we are not connected to the grid. We want to accept a wide range of voltages from the generator because generators are typically horrendous compared to the grid. And UPS function basically means as soon as the AC current or voltage or frequency input fluctuates a little bit, it's going to kick it off and start inverting, and it's going to do it as fast as possible like a UPS. Now, if you've got a generator that's even slightly dodgy, it will just kick it off for any random reason, a load change, or the generator just surges for some reason, it'll kick it off. So I normally disable the UPS function. That will make it hold on to the generator for a bit longer. AC output voltage, you can select 230 to 10, 20, from 230 up to 245. Normally, I just leave it at the accepted grid voltage that you're expecting or wanting. But let's say the inverter system is a long way away from the property or the house and running through an underground mains or something like that, then perhaps you could set that up a little bit to 240 volts so that by the time it gets to the house and there's a big load on, it only sags maybe 2 or 3 volts or so. So you can adjust that if you want to. Now, this is important. This is battery voltage. What battery voltage do you want the system to shut down at? Now, this is where it comes into, we need to start looking at the Victron Freedom 1. If you've got a Freedom 1 battery, and they're exceptionally good batteries, if you've got a Freedom 1 battery, you go through the page here and you find, what are we finding? We're finding that screen there. So we're going to find a picture of that. Oh, here we go. That's the screen there. So DC input shutdown voltage is 47 volts. So we just put that in there. Basically, you're just going to go through, and I can shift this down a bit so we can scroll up. 52.5, 51.5. So we'll go 52.5, 51.5. Very easy. Just follow through this programming. Okay. Now you'll notice there's a bit of a difference here. See here in the web page, we've got get settings and send settings. This is if you're actually connected through a laptop direct to the inverter on site. This is not what we're doing now. That little side pane is not got any data in it at all. So that means that we're working on this file remotely. If you were connected to it directly, you would need a Mark III USB to connect your laptop to the inverter, and you'd do this program directly. Then you'd send the settings from the laptop, but we're not going to send the settings. We're going to upload them. Okay, so power assist, you may or may not want that. If it's a small generator, I would recommend putting power assist on, ticking it. You can read that up in the manual. Let's go to charger. Oh, by the way, don't enable AES. That's if there's very, very little power. The inverter will shut down and just pulse power every few seconds. And that's not good really for normal appliances. And it's certainly not good if you're trying to sleep and you've got an LED light and that will pulse every few seconds. That's a really old setting that was designed for being extremely conservative on power and battery systems. So even the standby power of 20 watts on the inverter would run the batteries flat because you had such small batteries. These days, for an off-grid system, that's usually not even applicable. So let's go to charger. We can scroll down on the web page again, and we go to charger settings tab, right? So you click on the battery type. And I've already put in Freedom 1, but I'm going to follow through. Click on lithium iron phosphate there, click OK. It says it's automatically changed the settings. Click OK. Now, what we need to do is set the battery voltage to 55.8 and absorption, sorry, and the float voltage to 55.8. So we're going to click on that, go 55.8, and that 55.8. Now, just so you know, these settings are only applicable. They're only applicable if the BMS gets disconnected from the Victron system. Otherwise, these settings will be overridden by the data that's coming from the battery BMS. There is one other application where these settings actually make a difference, and that is when you've got AC coupled solar and at frequency shifts. The frequency shift will happen based on the absorb and the float voltages. Now, virtual switch, we don't want to do that. I won't even explain it. It's not worth it. Now, we can add an assistant, but in this case, we're not going to. You've got lots of assistants available that can control things like ESS if you're connected to the grid, or you can use a relay assistant. You can go programmable relay, and that will then turn a relay off and on the inverter, not on the GX device. This is the inverter assistance. So you can program those assistants, but you don't really need to. Advanced, don't worry about that. It's not important. What we're going to do now is we're going to shut that and look at this. It says, be aware, due to some of the changes that we've made, it's actually going to turn the inverter off and on again. So it has to do a reboot, a power cycle. So we go, yes, that's fine. We go back to the Victron portal. And we are going to upload that file. We need to find the file. It's going to be in your downloads folder, and it's going to be an RVSC file, slightly different from the one that we merged before. And it's going to be the latest file in the folder. So if you're worried, you can look at the date modified and see it's 4:51 p.m., which is great because it's 4:51 p.m. And we double click and away we go. It's going to upload that file to the inverter, and then it's all programmed. Now, what I do like to do is I actually like to download that again. This is a little bit pedantic, but it's good to download it again, because what that means is you can go through and check that all the settings have taken. And there's no settings in that program that have not taken. There might have been an internet outage during the upload, or it could have been anything like someone turned on a crazy noisy load, which is unlikely, but it could be something like a VSD, an old VSD that's putting out a lot of harmonics, and the inverter may not have taken that program. So it's good to just check by downloading, opening it again in the vConfigure 3, and just click on each of the tabs and make sure that it looks like you've gone through. See, we've got that there. We programmed that. I remember that. We unticked UPS. Good. Inverter 4752.5. Good. That's right. All the settings appear to be right. Okay, so we can shut that. We don't need to upload it again. We're just checking that it is actually taken those programming. That programming. So the last thing we need to do, one thing we haven't programmed, right? We've programmed, if we look at the device list, we have programmed the gateway, which is the GX device, and we did that through the remote console. We've programmed the VE bus system, which is the inverter, and we did that through remote VE configure. And we've got a battery on there. Now the battery's already programmed. We don't need to program that. Solar charger. The last thing we need to program is the solar charger. So the way we do that is a completely different piece of software altogether. What we're going to do is we're going to select, find the Victron software called Victron Connect, and that should have been loaded on your laptop. If it wasn't, then go down to Victron Software Tools under Victron Energy, go to Victron Software Downloads, and click on Victron Connect for whatever device you're using. And then you're going to go to your start menu and type in V for Victron and Victron Connect and click on that. And that is going to bring up your Victron Connect VRM portal and local portal. So if you're in local, you can click on that. But if you're in you need to click on VRM portal. And the first time through, you're going to need to log into Victron Connect using your VRM portal. Once you're logged in, you then need to type, I'm going to type setup because this is what the site is called. And I'll click on VRM. There it is. This is the site that we're working on. I'll go back to this so you can see that. See there, that's the site name. Okay, so if I go back to dashboard, that's the site name that I'm going to type in the Victron Connect app. Okay, so I'll full screen that so we can see what's going on. I'm going to click on the Victron setup. See there, it's connecting. You can see there that that smart charger has appeared. This is the Servo GX. And I can go to VRM if I like, but we are already just there. And what's attached to that smart charger is through the VE direct cable. What's attached to the Servo GX is a smart solar charger. Click on that. And it's going to take a while. It's going to bring all the data in from that solar charger. So you can see the battery voltages come in. You normally would see the voltage from the solar. And see up in the top right here, we've got a little cloud. It's downloading stuff from the cloud, and that is now a settings cog. So we're going to click on the settings cog. Basically just going to go to battery. Now this is the way you're going to set up the battery programming for the charge controller. Now the first thing I want you to notice is this: BMS controlled, yes. So this charge controller is already being controlled by the BMS. Okay, so what that means is that you've got the BMS making all the decisions for the charge controller, but you still need to program it. Now, the reason you need to program it is that if the BMS on the battery gets disconnected for some reason, this charge controller can be reset to run manually. Now, automatically, what will happen is it will stop charging because it wants to protect the battery. Now, I think that's a good decision from Victron, although what it means is if the battery comms disappears, you're going to lose your charging. Okay, so if the battery comms disappears and you lose your charging, what's going to happen? Your battery's going to go flat. So we can talk about how to recuperate that in another video, but in this video, we're going to go to setup of this charge controller. So rotary switch. You really don't want to use a rotary switch. The rotary switch is a really old-fashioned feature, which is still being used. It was built in years ago, and it's a physical switch on the charge controller that you can set. It doesn't have a position, unfortunately, for lithium batteries. So we go now rotary switch. Well, not any lithium that that we deal with. It's certainly not the Freedom 1 or the lower voltage lithiums. If you leave it on rotary switch, it's likely that the first day your battery's just going to turn off. So we want to go select preset for a start. We're going to scroll down all the presets. We're going to go to Smart Lithium. Click OK. Now we want to change the voltages. See there, it's 56.8. You want to change that for your battery. So absorb voltage is 55.8. And float voltage again is 55.8. You can see equalization is disabled. Now you'll notice that these ticks over here, watch this. Look at that green tick. As I change this, I'm going to change it to 55 as an example. It will circle around and then it will tick. And that tick means that setting has been accepted by the charge controller in real time. So we're not now going to upload a file. There's none of that. This is real time. So we are now accessing this charge controller in real time. And what you should also see here is that temperature compensation is disabled. Temperature compensation is generally for lead acid batteries and a few other chemistries, but not lithium. Low temperature cutoff is set at 5 degrees. You cannot charge a lithium battery below 0 degrees, otherwise you'll damage it. So 5 degrees is just a safety threshold. So that is all we need to know. Charge voltages done. You're all set to go. Unless you've got a very small battery and you need to ramp back the charge current, you can limit the charge current below the maximum of the charge controller if you want to. But very rarely is that done. I will cover this BMS controlled. So if your BMS is not available anymore, then you can press reset and it will reset the charge controller to no BMS controlled, and that will then revert back to these settings here that you've programmed rather than what the battery is requesting. It says yes now because the charge controller can see that it's got data coming from the battery via the GX device. So I go reset. Yes, I'm going to reset it. And it says no for a while. And then it will come back and click onto yes as soon as it sees data coming from the BMS again. It may take seconds or it may take up to a minute. But there we go. It sees a BMS. It's going to now revert to whatever the BMS is saying and not its own programming. So that's it. We can now just close that down and the charge controller is programmed. So what you've now done is set up the programming for your GX device using the remote console, your inverter using device list, and then going into VE configure. And you've also set up your charge controller using the app on your PC or whatever device. You can also use that app on your phone. And you've set that app up, the solar charger using that app. So all of the hardware now is set up. All you need to do now is set up things like invite users to the site or set a location on the site or name the site using general, set up alarm rules so that people can get emailed if things go on. You can put notes on the site, whatever notes you want to, you can just add to the site so that people can see, and you might put notes, this was set up by so-and-so and installed by so-and-so, or I've made this programming change, whatever you want to do. You can add photos to the site by clicking photos and it will add a photo. That's handy if you want to see what the site looks like when you come back to support it later on. You can share the site publicly or limited publicly through a hidden link. So you can go enable site sharing and you can copy the URL. You can password protect it if you want to. You can hide the location, which I normally would do. You can show it on Victron if you want it to be really public. So I'm going to disable that because we don't want to enable that. There's a whole lot of other things you can do, but basically your setup is done and dusted. And you can see there, got a battery voltage, got charge controller details, all sorts of stuff. So that is basically it. So thank you for watching. And if you've got any questions, just leave them in the links below if you want to, or have a look at some of the other videos I've got. And I put these videos up maybe once a week or once a month. I don't know. It's nothing regular. It's just as I see I've got something to update. So I often do this particular video and I regularly update it. If Victron makes any changes to their support or their configuration system, and Victron are always making changes. So, and they're always good. Well, most of them are good. I can't think of one right now that's not, but I have to caveat that, of course. But Victron are always making changes, and their software is just brilliant. It's going ahead in leaps and bounds. It's insane how good the Victron software is, and it seems really complex. If this is your first time through, then it's really complex, right? And it's hard to get your head around it, which is exactly why I try and make these videos. The reason it's so complex is because the use cases for Victron are immense. You can do so much stuff with it, and so they open up the full access to their system so that you can do a lot of things with it. And they are trying and successfully trying to make it less and less difficult to understand. But look, anyway, thank you for watching. And I hope you managed to set your system up. If there's anything I missed, let me know, because on the next one, I might include it if it's something that I feel like is important for the customers that I deal with. So all the best and enjoy God's great sunshine and stay happy.